Hello. At dinner, my wife raised her wine glass and casually declared to everyone, Dylan is the priority. You're always second, Michael. I kept eating with a smile, but inside, something broke. What happened next shattered their perfect family structure and left them pleading for mercy they'd never offered me. My name is Michael Elliott. I'm 62, and I own 4 pawn shops in Phoenix. Businesses I built from the ground up over the last 25 years. I understand the value of things, gold, diamonds, antiques, collectibles. What I didn't learn was how to value myself in my own home. That evening was supposed to be a celebration. Brenda, my wife of 8 years, had invited her sister Janet and her husband Tom over for dinner. We were celebrating Dylan's so-called business opportunity. But knowing Dylan, it could mean anything from selling energy drinks to starting another failed podcast. I grilled steaks on the patio, opened a bottle of wine that cost more than most people's weekly grocery budget, and set the table with Brenda's good china, the kind she inherited from her grandmother. Everything seemed fine until Dylan raised his glass. Here's to family, he said, standing with the smug grin he'd worn since he was 16, realizing my wallet was always open to him. And to Mom, who's always had my back no matter what. Always, Brenda echoed, clinking her glass against his, giving me a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Dylan comes first in this house, she declared. He always has, and he always will. You're always second, Michael. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, but she said it so nonchalantly, as if she was talking about the weather. Janet and Tom looked uncomfortable. Tom cleared his throat and took a long sip of wine, while Janet started cutting her steak. I slowly set down my fork, keeping my face neutral. 25 years in the pawn business teaches you to manage your reactions, especially when someone tries to provoke you. But inside, something shifted, something permanent. Good to know where I stand, I said quietly, picking up my wine glass. Brenda laughed. Come on, Michael. Don't be so sensitive. You knew what you were getting into when you married me. Dylan's my son, and you're my husband. I kept my voice steady. Yes, but Dylan's my blood. She snapped back. You're just Michael. Just Michael. As if I were some random person picked off the street instead of the man who had been paying for Dylan's car insurance, phone bills, and various failed business ventures for over a decade. I finished my wine in silence while the conversation awkwardly continued. Dylan talked about his latest scheme, something with cryptocurrency and energy drinks. I wasn't really listening anymore. My mind was on the safe in my office, the one Brenda didn't know existed, where I kept all our important documents, including some papers she'd probably forgotten she signed. After Janet and Tom left, making quick excuses about early meetings, I helped clear the table while Brenda hummed in the kitchen, washing dishes like nothing had happened. You really meant what you said tonight? I asked, taking a plate. About what? She responded without turning around. About me being second. She shrugged. It's just the truth, Michael. I thought you understood that. I folded the dish towel and sat on the counter. I understand perfectly now. That night, after Brenda fell asleep, I went to my office and opened the safe. It was time to remind myself exactly what I was worth and what I wasn't willing to lose. The next morning, I woke up before dawn, just like I had every day for the last 30 years. Old military habits die hard. Brenda was still asleep, sprawled across 3/4 of our king-size bed like she owned the whole thing, which, based on the dinner conversation, maybe she thought she did. I made coffee, standing by the window, watching the sunrise paint the desert sky. Phoenix mornings are beautiful, but that day, the beauty felt hollow, like looking at something you once loved but lost. Around 7, Dylan shuffled into the kitchen, wearing yesterday's clothes and that glazed look he always had when he'd been up all night working on projects. In Dylan's world, that could mean anything from day trading with money he didn't have to writing business plans that would never go anywhere. Morning, Mike, he said, opening the refrigerator like he lived here. It's Michael, I corrected, as I had 100 times before. He grabbed orange juice straight from the carton, drinking it without bothering with a glass. Right, Michael? Listen, I need to talk to you about something. Here it comes, I thought, another brilliant business opportunity that would require my financial support. I've been thinking about what Mom said last night, Dylan continued, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. About family priorities and all that. Have you? Yeah. And I think it's cool that you get it, that you understand where you fit in here. He said it like he was doing me a favor by explaining my place in my own home. I set my coffee mug down carefully. Where exactly do I fit in, Dylan? He shrugged. You're like the provider, the guy who makes sure everything runs smoothly. Mom and I, we're the real family. You're more like. He paused, trying to find the right word. Support staff. Support staff in my own house, using my electricity to keep the orange juice cold in my own fridge. Support staff, I repeated, trying to understand the absurdity of it all. Don't take it the wrong way, Mike, he continued. Michael, it's an important job. We appreciate you. The way he said, appreciate, reminded me of how I'd speak to the kid who bags groceries at the store, polite but distant, temporary. That's generous of you, I said. Dylan either didn't catch the sarcasm or decided to ignore it. Anyway, he went on, I want to run something by you. I've got this opportunity to get in on the ground floor of a new app. It's like Uber, but for dog walking. Of course it was. I just need about $5,000 to buy in. Mom said you'd probably be cool with it since you're part of the team now. Part of the team, the support staff part, apparently. I looked at Dylan, really looked at him. 28 years old, never held a job for more than 6 months, never paid his rent, and never had to worry about where his next meal would come from because good old Michael was always there with his wallet open. I'll think about it, I replied. Awesome. Mom said you'd come around, he said, heading back to the stairs before turning around. Oh, and thanks for understanding about the family thing. It's nothing personal. Nothing personal. Just my entire life being redefined as a service position. After he left, I sat alone in the kitchen, reflecting on safes, documents, and the difference between being appreciated and respected. It was going to be an interesting day. Later that afternoon, I drove to First National Bank downtown. Robert Anderson, my personal banker for over 15 years, had always been one of those old-school guys who understood that discretion was more important than small talk. Michael, Robert said as he stood up from behind his mahogany desk. Good to see you. What brings you in today? I set my briefcase down and pulled out a manila folder. I need to make some adjustments to my accounts. Estate planning stuff. He nodded, leaning back into his chair. Of course. What kind of adjustments are we talking about? I opened the folder and pulled out the first document. I want to remove Brenda as a beneficiary on my life insurance policy. She'll keep her access to the joint checking account, but everything else needs to be restructured. Robert raised an eyebrow slightly, but didn't ask questions. That's why I'd been banking with him for so long. I also want to set up a new business account, I continued. Something separate from our joint accounts. I'm thinking about expanding the pawn shop operations, maybe opening a 5th location. Smart move, Robert said, pulling out the necessary paperwork. Real estate market's been good for commercial properties. For the next hour, we worked through the details, new account structures, updated beneficiary forms, revised access permissions. Every signature felt like cutting another thread that had been holding me down. One more thing, I said as we finished. I want to transfer ownership of the Scottsdale pawn shop into the new business entity. Make it clean and separate. No problem. That'll take about a week to process. I shook his hand and left the bank feeling lighter than I had in months. Brenda had no idea that the Scottsdale location was worth more than our house. She had never cared much about the business side, always assuming the money would keep flowing. That evening, I sat in my office reviewing insurance documents when Brenda knocked on the door. Michael, dinner's ready. Be right there. I called back. I looked at the papers spread out on my desk, bank statements, business licenses, property deeds, all the building blocks of a life I'd spent 30 years creating. Tomorrow, I'd start phase 2. Time to remind everyone exactly who owned what around here. 3 days later, Dylan cornered me in the garage while I was working on my truck. He had that eager look he always got when he thought he'd figured out a new angle to separate me from my money. Michael, I'm glad I caught you, he said, leaning against my workbench like he belonged there. I want to talk to you about that app opportunity. I kept changing the oil filter, not looking up. What about it? Well, I've been doing more research, and this thing is going to be huge, Dylan said. The founder used to work for Google, and they've already got interest from major investors. Uh-huh, I responded. The thing is, the buy-in window closes this Friday. After that, it goes to the next funding round, and the minimum investment jumps to $50,000. Of course it did. There was always some deadline designed to create urgency. So, you still need $5,000? I asked. Actually, I was thinking bigger, Dylan said, his voice rising with excitement. If I put in 10 grand, I get a bigger stake. And if this takes off like I think it will, we're talking about life-changing money, Michael. I wiped my hands on a rag and finally looked at him. Well, yeah, technically, it would be my investment, but you get your money back, plus interest. Think of it like a loan. Like all the other loans I'd given him over the years, the ones that somehow never got paid back. Tell me about this founder, I said. Dylan's face lit up. His name is Brandon Tech. Well, that's his business name. He's this young genius who figured out how to optimize route efficiency for service workers. The app connects dog owners with walkers, but the real innovation is in the algorithm. Brandon Tech, I repeated, raising an eyebrow. And you've met him? Well, not in person, but I've been on video calls with his team. They're super professional. I nodded slowly. And where exactly is this company based? It's a virtual company, Dylan explained. That's the beauty of it. Low overhead, maximum efficiency. A virtual company run by someone named Brandon Tech, who Dylan had never met. It sounded like exactly the kind of scam that separated fools from their money every day. I'll tell you what, Dylan, I said, closing the hood of my truck. Let me think about it. Over the weekend, 10,000 is a significant investment. Awesome. I knew you'd see the potential, Dylan said as he started heading back to the house. He turned around. Oh, and Mom wanted me to tell you she's planning something special for next week. Some kind of surprise. After he left, I stood in my garage, thinking about dog walking apps and surprise plans. In my line of work, I'd learned to spot desperation from a mile away. People brought me their grandmother's jewelry, their father's tools, their wedding rings, always with a story about how temporary the situation was, how they'd be back to buy everything back next week. Dylan had that same desperate energy, that same elaborate story designed to make a bad deal sound like an opportunity. The difference was, in my business, people at least offered collateral. Friday evening, I was in my office when I heard the front door slam. Through the window, I watched Dylan storm across the driveway to his beat-up Honda Civic. The engine sputtered to life, and he peeled out of the driveway like his tail was on fire. Brenda appeared in my office doorway a few minutes later, her face flushed with anger. Dylan just told me what you said to him, she said, crossing her arms. What did I say to him? You told him his investment opportunity was a scam. You embarrassed him, Michael. I leaned back in my chair and looked at her. I told him I researched his dog walking app and found some red flags. The company's address is just a mailbox in a strip mall, and Brandon Tech doesn't exist in any business registry. That doesn't mean it's a scam. Brenda, he wanted $10,000 for a company that exists only as a website. In my business, we call that fraud. Her eyes flashed. Your business. Always your business. God forbid you support Dylan's dreams for once. I've supported plenty of his dreams. The food truck that never got built, the drop shipping business that lost money, the cryptocurrency mining operation that fried our electrical system. Those were learning experiences. Expensive lessons that I paid for. I stood up and walked to my safe, punching in the combination. Since we're talking about Dylan's financial history, maybe you'd like to see this. I pulled out a thick folder and handed it to her. Inside were copies of every check I'd written to Dylan over the past 5 years, every bank transfer, every emergency loan that had never been repaid. Brenda flipped through the pages, her expression changing from anger to confusion to something that might have been shock. $47,000, I said quietly. That's what your son has cost me in 5 years. Not including the car insurance, the cell phone bills, or the groceries he eats when he stays here. I didn't realize it was that much. Because you never asked. You just assumed the money would always be there. She closed the folder and sat on my desk. Dylan's going through a tough time. He's trying to find himself. He's 28 years old, Brenda. If he hasn't found himself by now, maybe it's time to stop looking at my wallet. The silence stretched between us like a canyon. Finally, she spoke. What are you saying, Michael? I'm saying the Bank of Michael Elliott is officially closed for business. She stared at me for a long moment, then turned and walked away without another word. I heard her bedroom door close upstairs, followed by the muffled sound of a phone conversation that went on for over an hour. I didn't need to guess who she was calling. The call came at 6:30 Tuesday morning. I was drinking coffee and reading the paper when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Is this Michael Elliott? A woman's voice asked. Yes, this is Officer Patricia Williams with Phoenix PD. I'm calling about an incident involving Dylan Reed. Are you a stepfather? My stomach dropped. Yes. What happened? Mr. Reed was involved in a single-vehicle accident early this morning. He's in stable condition at St. Joseph's Hospital, but there are some complications we need to discuss. What kind of complications? Mr. Reed was arrested at the scene for driving under the influence. His blood alcohol level was 15. The vehicle he was driving is registered to Brenda Elliott. Is that your wife? I set my coffee mug down carefully. Yes, it is, Mr. Elliott. The vehicle was totaled, and there's significant property damage. Mr. Reed hit a retaining wall outside a shopping center. The property owner is pressing charges for the damage, which is estimated at around $15,000. $15,000, plus whatever legal fees Dylan would need, plus the fact that he'd been driving Brenda's car without my knowledge. Officer Williams, what's the bail situation? Bail has been set at $25,000. Someone will need to post that before Mr. Reed can be released. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen thinking about phone calls and consequences. Dylan had been driving Brenda's car, the Lexus I'd been making payments on for 3 years. The car that was technically in her name, but financed through her joint account. My phone rang again. This time it was Brenda. Michael, thank God you answered, she said, her voice shaky. Dylan's in the hospital. There was an accident. I know. The police called me. We need to get him out of jail. The bail is $25,000. I walked over to my window and gazed at the desert morning. Clear skies, not a cloud in sight. Michael, did you hear me? Brenda's voice broke through my thoughts. I heard you, I replied. So, you'll take care of it? She asked. Take care of what exactly? The bail money. We need to get Dylan out of there. Why would I do that? The silence on the other end of the line was so long that I thought the call had dropped. Because he's family, she finally said. According to you, I'm just support staff, I responded. Remember, second place in this family hierarchy? Michael, this isn't the time for. For what? I interrupted. For remembering exactly where I stand in your priorities? I think this is the perfect time, I said, and then hung up the phone, returning to my newspaper. 20 minutes later, my phone rang again. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again and again. By noon, I had received 14 calls from Brenda and 6 from Dylan himself, all coming from jail. I didn't answer a single one. Second place doesn't pay bail money. By Thursday morning, the calls escalated to a full-scale assault on my peace of mind. Brenda had enlisted reinforcements. Her sister Janet, her mother, and even Dylan's high school girlfriend, who I'd met exactly twice. They all had the same message. I was being unreasonable. Dylan needed help, and family meant forgiveness. The voicemails were getting more desperate. Brenda's voice was hoarse from crying. Michael, please, he's been in jail for 3 days. You're the only one who can help us. Dylan's calls shifted from anger to what he probably thought was strategic manipulation. Look, Michael, I know we've had our differences, but I'm ready to change. This could be my wake-up call, but only if you help me get out of here. I deleted each message without listening to the end. Thursday afternoon, Brenda showed up at my shop. I was in the back office when my manager, Tony, knocked on the door. Boss, your wife's here. She looks pretty upset. Through the security monitor, I saw Brenda pacing between the jewelry cases and the electronics section. Her hair was a mess, her makeup smudged. She looked like she'd been sleeping in her car. Tell her I'm in a meeting, I said. She says she'll wait. Then tell her the meeting might last all day. Tony hesitated. Boss, she's crying. It's making the customers uncomfortable. I looked at the monitor again. Brenda was indeed crying, but there was something calculated about it. The way she positioned herself so everyone could see her, the theatrical dabbing at her eyes with tissues. Tell her to leave, Tony. If she doesn't, call the police. An hour later, she was gone. But the drama wasn't over. That evening, my neighbor Frank knocked on my door, holding a manila envelope. Michael, I hate to get involved in family business, but this was left on my porch with a note asking me to give it to you. Inside the envelope were photographs. Dylan in his jail cell, looking appropriately miserable. Dylan in court, wearing an orange jumpsuit. A copy of the medical report from his accident, highlighting a concussion and some bruised ribs. The note was in Brenda's handwriting. He's your stepson. You helped raise him. Don't let your pride destroy what's left of this family. I handed the envelope back to Frank. Frank, if anyone else leaves anything on your porch for me, just throw it away. You got it, buddy. That night, I sat in my office with a glass of bourbon, thinking about pride and family and the difference between helping someone and enabling them. Dylan had been making bad decisions for years, always knowing that I'd bail him out. Maybe it was time he learned what consequences actually felt like. The phone rang again. This time it was a number I didn't recognize. Mr. Elliott, this is Public Defender Sarah Martinez. I'm representing Dylan Reed. What can I do for you, counselor? Mr. Reed asked me to call you about his bail situation. He seems to think you might be willing to help. Mr. Reed is mistaken. Sir, I understand there might be family tensions, but your stepson is facing serious charges. A DUI with property damage could mean significant jail time. That sounds like a problem Dylan should have considered before getting behind the wheel drunk. There was a pause. Mr. Elliott, are you saying you won't help with bail? That's exactly what I'm saying. May I ask why? I thought about dinner parties, support staff, and being told I was second place in my own home. Because some lessons are worth more than $25,000. Friday morning brought a new development. Brenda's entire family descended on my house like a plague of locusts. I watched from my office window as 3 cars pulled into my driveway. Janet and Tom, Brenda's mother Eleanor, and 2 people I didn't recognize, more relatives drawn to the drama. They didn't knock. They just walked in through the front door like they owned the place. I could hear them in my living room, voices raised in an urgent conversation. Words like stubborn and heartless drifted down the hallway. After about 10 minutes, Brenda called out, Michael, we need to talk. I opened my office door and walked to the living room. The assembled family court looked like a scene from a bad daytime TV show. Eleanor was holding tissues. Janet was pacing. Tom looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Michael, Eleanor said, standing up with the authority of a woman who'd been matriarch of this family for 60 years. This nonsense has gone on long enough. What nonsense is that, Eleanor? You know exactly what I'm talking about. Dylan is sitting in jail because of your pride. I looked around the room at 5 pairs of eyes, all staring at me with varying degrees of disapproval. Dylan is sitting in jail because he drove drunk and destroyed someone's property, I said calmly. He made a mistake, Janet snapped. Everyone makes mistakes. Some mistakes cost $25,000 to fix. Brenda stepped forward, her hands clasped in front of her like she was praying. Michael, I'm begging you. I'll do anything. I'll get a job. I'll pay you back. You'll what, Brenda? Respect me as your husband instead of treating me like an ATM? Value my opinion instead of dismissing it? Stop putting Dylan's wants ahead of our marriage. The room went quiet. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. Is that what this is about? You're jealous of a mother's love for her child? I'm tired of being told I'm second place in my own marriage. Well, you are, Brenda shouted, finally dropping the tearful martyr act. Dylan is my son. You will always come first. That's what being a mother means. There it was. The truth finally spoken out loud in front of witnesses. And that, I said quietly, is why second place doesn't pay. I walked back to my office and closed the door. Behind me, the yelling started immediately, voices overlapping, accusations flying, Eleanor demanding to know what kind of man abandons family in their time of need. I opened my safe and pulled out a folder I'd been saving for this moment. Inside the envelope were copies of bank statements, canceled checks, and a detailed accounting of every dollar I'd spent on Dylan over the years. Also included were copies of the new account structures I'd set up, showing exactly which assets Brenda no longer had access to. 20 minutes later, the voices in the living room faded. Car doors slammed in the driveway. The engine started. I waited until the house was quiet, then walked back to the living room. It was empty except for Brenda, who was sitting on the couch, staring at the floor. They're all gone, she said without looking up. I noticed. My own family thinks I'm a terrible wife. Are you? She finally looked at me, her eyes red and swollen. I don't know anymore. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Then I remembered the dinner party, the casual cruelty, the years of being taken for granted. Neither do I said, and walked back to my office. The folder full of financial documents sat open on my desk. Tomorrow, I'd start making some calls. It was time to see how much Dylan's freedom was really worth to the people who claimed to love him most. 2 weeks after Dylan's arrest, The pressure campaign reached its peak. Brenda had exhausted every family connection, every mutual friend, and every guilt trip in her arsenal. The house felt like a war zone, with her camping out in the guest bedroom and me maintaining my fortress in the office. Tuesday evening, my phone rang with the call I'd been expecting but dreading. Mr. Elliot, this is Detective James Rodriguez with Phoenix PD Financial Crimes Division. Detective Rodriguez, we need to discuss some irregularities we found regarding your wife and her access to your business accounts. I've been waiting for this. What kind of irregularities? It appears someone has been attempting to transfer funds from your business account to cover bail money for Dylan Reed. The bank flagged it as potential fraud, as the account holder, you, never authorized the transfers. I felt a cold rage settle in my chest. Are you telling me my wife tried to steal from my business to bail out her son? That's what it looks like. The attempts were unsuccessful, but the intent appears clear. We'd like you to come in and file a formal complaint. After hanging up, I found Brenda in the kitchen, staring out the window at nothing. Brenda, I said quietly. She turned around, and I could see the defeat in her eyes. The detective called you? Yes, she said, her voice shaky. I wasn't trying to steal from you, Michael. I was trying to save my son by committing fraud against your own husband. She started crying again, but this time there was no manipulation, just exhaustion and desperation. I don't know how to be the mother of a man who's in jail. I don't know how to live with myself if something happens to him in there. And I don't know how to be married to someone who'd rather commit crimes than admit her son needs to face consequences. So what happens now? I looked at the woman I had once loved. Really looked at her. Somewhere along the way, she'd become a stranger who happened to live in my house and share my bank account. Now you call Dylan and tell him that his mother loves him enough to let him grow up. And us. I pulled out an envelope I'd been carrying for days. Divorce papers, already filed and processed. There is no us, Brenda. There hasn't been for a long time. She took the papers with shaking hands, scanning the first page. You're really doing this? Dylan will be released in 3 to 5 years with good behavior. You can start your new life then if you want, but you'll be starting it without me. She nodded slowly, tears falling onto the legal documents. I'm sorry, Michael, for all of it. I know you are, but sorry doesn't change 8 years of being treated like a walking checkbook. The next morning, I watched her pack her belongings into her sister's car. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of consequences she'd never had to face before. As they drove away, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, peace. My phone rang one last time. Dylan's number from the county jail. This time, I answered. Hello, Dylan. Michael, thank God. Listen, I know things have been weird between us, but I really need. Dylan, I interrupted. Your mother and I are getting divorced. I'm not your stepfather anymore, which means I'm not your problem anymore either. Silence on the other end. But if you ever get out of there and decide you want to be an actual man instead of a professional victim, you know where to find me. I hung up before he could respond. Second place doesn't pay, but first place in your own life? That's priceless. 6 months later, I was standing in the backyard of my house. My house now officially and completely, watching the sunrise paint the desert sky in shades of golden orange. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant hum of morning traffic and the occasional bird. The divorce had been finalized 3 weeks ago. Brenda had tried to fight for half the assets, but her attempted fraud had pretty much killed any sympathy the judge might have had. She'd ended up with enough money to start over, but not enough to maintain the lifestyle she'd grown accustomed to on my dime. Dylan had been sentenced to 18 months, plus restitution for the property damage. I'd heard through mutual acquaintances that Brenda had moved back in with her mother and taken a job at a department store. Eleanor apparently was not impressed with her daughter's life choices. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from my business partner, Tony, who'd bought into the pawn shop operation after the divorce freed up some capital. New location in Tempe is killing it. You ready to look at that Tucson property? I smiled and typed back, set up the meeting. Building something felt good again. For the first time in years, I was making decisions based on what I wanted, not what someone else needed. My doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. I walked through the house, noting how much larger it felt without the constant tension that had filled it for so long. Frank from next door was standing on my porch holding a manila envelope. Morning, Michael. This was left on my porch again, addressed to you. I took the envelope, recognizing Brenda's handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a photograph. The photo showed Dylan in his prison uniform, but he looked different, cleaner, somehow healthier. His eyes had lost that entitled glaze I'd grown so tired of. The letter was short. Michael, Dylan wanted me to send this. He's been working in the prison library, helping other inmates get their GEDs. He asked me to tell you he finally understands what you meant about earning respect instead of demanding it. He doesn't expect anything from you, but he wanted you to know he's trying to become the man you always said he could be. Brenda, I studied the photo for a long moment. Maybe prison would teach Dylan what 8 years of free money couldn't. Maybe not. Either way, it wasn't my problem anymore. I folded the letter and put it in my pocket, not because I was planning to reach out, but because sometimes growth deserves acknowledgement, even from a distance. That afternoon, I drove to the new Tempe location. The shop was busy, filled with customers who understood the value of things, people who brought me their treasures, not because they were entitled to money, but because they needed it and were willing to work for it. As I watched Tony help a young mother pawn her grandmother's ring to pay for car repairs, I thought about value and respect and the difference between being needed and being appreciated. My phone rang. Unknown number, but I answered anyway. Is this Michael Elliott? Yes. Mr. Elliott, my name is Sarah Williams. I'm a real estate agent, and I have a client who's very interested in making an offer on your Scottsdale pawn shop location. I leaned back in my chair and smiled. I'm listening. The offer was good, very good, enough to fund the Tucson expansion and still have plenty left over for whatever came next. As I hung up, I realized something that had taken me 62 years to learn. When you stop accepting second place in your own life, amazing things become possible. The sun was setting over Phoenix, painting the sky in brilliant shades of red and purple. I had dinner plans with some friends from the Rotary Club, people who valued my opinions and respected my time. People who understood that true family isn't about blood or obligation. It's about mutual respect and shared values. I locked up the shop and headed home to get ready for dinner. For the first time in years, I was looking forward to whatever came next. Second place had finally learned how to win. Bye-bye.